Hello everyone! Before watching this video, I would like to ask everyone to subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on any videos and content that I post here at Patrick's Crazy Place. These videos include my thoughts on professional wrestling, any updates I provide on my upcoming book, Godzilla the Monster Fight Record, Volumes 1 and 2, and what other random topic comes to my mind that I feel like talking about that day. Also, the description of this video includes a link to my other YouTube channel, The Weekday Warriors of Wrestling, which is a podcast that I do with co-host Eric Clancy. We just did our latest episode, so be sure to check that out. There will also be a link to my Twitter if you want to keep in touch with me and stay up to date on whatever it is I'm rambling about that day. So, with all of that said, enjoy the video. Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my series highlighting The Undertaker's career, going through each year of his 30-year run with the WWE and observing his best matches and his worst matches from each year. Now, unfortunately, I think I kind of screwed the pooch here because Decade 1 of The Undertaker's career is actually the most interesting as far as picking best matches and worst matches go. At least it is to me. And when you get later into Undertaker's career, he wrestles less and less and less, and by the end of the second decade, he's practically a special attraction. He's a guy that only wrestles a handful of times a year, sometimes even less than that, and it gets harder and harder to find both the best and the worst for each year because there's not that much to choose from. So sometimes you'll have good matches that wind up being the worst of the year just by default, and a bunch of weird scenarios like that, but that comes a little bit later. Now we're opening up. Part 2 is going to cover the year 2000 to the year 2009, and the decade, the new millennium for The Undertaker starts off with him transitioning characters. At the end of his first decade, we had seen him become the leader of the Ministry of Darkness, a dark satanic cult leader that wore freaky robes and performed human sacrifices and all sorts of other weird crap. They'd pretty much pushed the dark side, dead man, spiritual, supernatural element of the Undertaker character as far as it could go. Like, once you've done the Ministry of Darkness, where else do you go with that character? They'd pretty much done all they could with it. So, when Undertaker took time off to heal some injuries and came back in the middle of 2000, he underwent a character change, coming in as what is known now as the American Badass Undertaker, where he came in with the Kid Rock song, American Badass. Later, he switched over to Rollin' by Limp Bizkit. He was a biker, dressed in, like, standard biker gear and jackets and vests and things like that, and rode to the ring on a motorcycle. Very interesting change for The Undertaker that went in the complete opposite direction from what he was doing previously, but ultimately that version of the character was basically just Mark Calaway playing himself, and allowed him to be more true to his own personality while portraying a wrestling character. Now, in comparing that to the Dead Man persona, I think the Dead Man persona is better for the world of professional wrestling, which is all about over-the-top characters, spectacle, and things like that. Wrestling a lot of times is at its best when it's kind of like a living comic book, and you see all these wacky characters interacting with each other and having these all-important matches against each other. But at this point, realism was kind of the name of the game, so this changeover was kind of fitting for Undertaker, and he made it work. And I think, like I said before, I feel like the Dead Man Undertaker had pretty much run its course by that point, and I think giving it a break for a few years was actually a really good move, and it allowed fans an opportunity to experience the Undertaker in a new way, gain a new appreciation for him, but then also have them kind of miss the Dead Man a little bit so that when it would come back in 2004, it would feel like a big deal. So that's where we are at this point. We're going to be starting with the American Badass years of The Undertaker before he would eventually go back to his darker persona and then transition into being more of a special attraction akin to something like Andre the Giant and things like that. So with all of that said, let's get started. Starting off with the year 2000, this would be The Undertaker's first year as the American Badass persona. He would return at Judgment Day 2000, coming in on the motorcycle with Kid Rock's theme playing, and interfering in the finish of the Rock Triple H Iron Man match. It was the world's first look at this brand new Undertaker, and he would stay in this persona for the next few years. Now, as far as Undertaker's matches during this time, there was a lot left to be desired. I don't know exactly what went wrong with a lot of his matches, but they weren't very good during this time, even after the long layoff to heal from some of his injuries. And I think there was a little bit of getting used to with this new American Badass character. I remember distinctly being super excited when Undertaker came back. And then it was either the next night on Raw or maybe the Raw after that, where he cut a promo on Vince saying, "Oh, I work for the company and your wife is paying me lots of zeros to kick your stank ass," or something like that. And I was like, what the hell did I just hear Undertaker say that? That was the weirdest thing. Undertaker being not only more human, but being kind of this kind of slang talking, modern lingo type of guy just felt really, really strange and a little off-putting at first. But eventually, over time, I did get used to the American Badass persona, and he did make it work once he worked all the kinks out. Now, picking a favorite match and a least favorite match of the year. Favorite match, there was really only one option for me. It was the six-pack Hell in a Cell match from Armageddon 2000, where you had defending champion Kurt Angle, Triple H, Rikishi, who's really kind of the one outlier in the whole thing, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and The Undertaker. I mean, you look at this match, and it's a lot of the top stars that the WWF had at that time. The only ones missing from that group would probably be Chris Jericho and Kane, who had a singles match on that same card. So, very stacked and star-studded main event, for sure, and it was a wild spectacle. I'm usually not a fan of the multi-person type of matches because they just turn into, complete free-for-alls and total car wrecks, but they can be fun from time to time, and when done in small doses. Now I feel like there's one every pay-per-view, but here it worked given the star power involved and just the craziness and the violence that was on display from everybody involved. One spot that really sticks out to me is Undertaker throwing Rikishi falling back first off of the top of the Hell in a Cell into that bed of hay. And it's funny because at the time, as a teenager, when I watched that match, I was like, oh, that wasn't as impressive as Foley's. Foley's didn't need the padding of the hay and the pickup truck or whatever. I'm like, oh, Foley's was more impressive. Looking back on it, and having recently rewatched that match, I'm thinking, man, that one's probably even scarier than Foley's, because the way Foley fell, he fell front first. So he could kind of see where he was landing and kind of guide himself to land as correctly as possible, given the circumstances. Here, Rikishi's just falling straight flat back, and he's just got to trust that he's going to land right in the truck. And I'm like, oh my God, that thing could have so easily gone wrong. Rikishi, very, very brave man taking a bump like that, because I could never fall backwards and just free fall like that. That is absolutely terrifying, but it was the main highlight of the match, and it involved The Undertaker delivering a death-defying move to some unfortunate soul that got trapped in a match with him. So, for the wild spectacle and the blood and the violence and the major star power involved, I think that the Armageddon six-pack challenge is Undertaker's best of the year. Now, picking a worst of the year, unfortunately, there were a few kind of off matches that could potentially be candidates. Some candidates for Undertaker's worst matches from 2000 probably are some of the matches with Kurt Angle. I know he had that match with him at Fully Loaded. That was okay-ish, I guess. They also had a match at Survivor Series, which I hate that match just for the pants Undertaker was wearing. I can't get over how ugly those pants were. I'm sorry. It's just, dude, terrible. But there was also that four-way at Unforgiven 2000 where it was Rock, Taker, Benoit, and Kane, all with the title on the line, and it was a forgettable match if there ever was one. Somewhat pointless, too. And probably the worst pay-per-view main event of the year. Speaking of pay-per-view main events, there was also the one at King of the Ring, which was the six-man tag team match with the WWF title on the line. Not a fan of that stipulation, but that match was saved largely by Undertaker choke-slamming Shane McMahon from the top of the ring post all the way to the announce table. A spectacular spot, and kind of saves that match from being completely useless. Shane and Undertaker would do something similar with their Hell in a Cell match years later, but I'll get there when I get there. And but if I had to pick a worst match for Undertaker, it's for one that technically didn't happen, but I'm going to pick it anyway. And that is his showdown with Kane at SummerSlam 2000. Now, my understanding is originally the plan was it was supposed to be Undertaker versus Big Show, but Big Show got sent down to OVW to get into better cardiovascular shape, and Undertaker got left without an opponent for SummerSlam, so they just randomly turned Kane heel out of nowhere just to do this match for the umpteenth time, and it resulted in a somewhat boring brawl where the match never officially started. They just kind of had this boring hardcore brawl where Undertaker ripped Kane's mask off for no reason, and then Kane ran off, and that was the end of it. And you think, like, man, in 1998, that was the match I wanted to see the most, and by this point in 2000, I groan at the sight of seeing that match again. So again, even by this point, Undertaker and Kane was a very stale pairing as dance partners or opponents. It was just something that didn't have the same level of intrigue that it had once had, and trust me, they would continue to beat that horse to death over the years. But yeah, if I had to pick a worst match, I'm going to go with the one that didn't happen, and that's his match with Kane at SummerSlam 2000. Now we enter the year 2001, a year where The Undertaker, I feel like, fit better into the American Badass persona. I think he had worked out all the issues and ironed out everything and become a much better performer and character within the role. And I think the fans had pretty much accepted it by this point too. I also think the changeover from American Badass to Limp Bizkit's Rolling actually worked better for him, and it worked better for his entrance, especially coming out on a motorcycle. It kind of worked. So all of that definitely helped out Undertaker in the long run. And his best match from 2001, I think it's one that comes from the WrestleMania that many say is the greatest WrestleMania of all time, and that is his match with Triple H at this event. Now, there are some criticisms of this match, like the referee being knocked out for an absurd amount of time without receiving any kind of medical attention. And there's also that spot that looked awesome initially where Undertaker chokeslammed Triple H off the scaffolding, but then when they showed the replay of it, you see that Triple H obviously landed in padding, which even so, it still looked cool initially. I just wish they didn't show where Triple H landed, and I think it would have had a lot more impact that way. But the match itself I thought was very exciting, and it was a wild brawl that was indicative of the era for sure. And it was like these two couldn't be contained. And it was a worthwhile match to have because by this point, Triple H had become the #1 heel in the company. And Undertaker had assumed the role of the legend that's kind of the enforcer, keeping everybody and everything in check, saying that he's the dog that runs the yard. And that was his, the stories about Undertaker being a locker room leader. This is where we started to see that translate onto the television show itself because he'd been around for so long. And now that he wasn't doing the dead man stuff, he had kind of taken on this kind of grizzled veteran, last samurai type of character, and it really worked for him. And I thought the match he had with Triple H was exciting, fun, and it was the first time where they'd really talked about the streak being on the line in any real capacity. The first time, and by this point, this is Undertaker's 9th win at WrestleMania, and this is the first time where they really started talking about it. It's like, oh hey, Undertaker's undefeated at WrestleMania, and obviously that would impact Undertaker's career greatly moving forward and turn the streak into a major attraction at the WWE's biggest event of the year. And this was kind of the beginning of it, becoming that thing where Triple H almost ended the streak with a shot with a sledgehammer out of the last ride, which awesome looking spot. But Undertaker kicked out, hit the last ride, got the win, and maintained that streak that would continue all the way until Brock Lesnar would dethrone him. But we've got a ways to go before we get to that. So now, picking a worst for 2001, I've got a couple of options, and most of them revolve around the invasion angle, which the big talking point of 2001 was the invasion angle, where WWE bought WCW and ECW had folded, and the war was essentially won. WWF, WWE reigned supreme, and Vince McMahon was at the top of the wrestling world. And they did the invasion angle on TV, which is something we dreamed about for years, and it disappointed every single one of us. Mainly because they didn't get the WCW stars that they really needed to make the angle work. One of the few guys they got was Diamond Dallas Page, who feuded with The Undertaker, and you're thinking, okay, cool, well, we got one guy, and he can have matches with people. Unfortunately, his matches with Undertaker were terrible because Undertaker basically just destroyed him. I mean, that cage match that they had at SummerSlam, where it was Kanyon and DDP versus Undertaker and Kane for both WWF and WCW tag titles, they basically got, and they meaning DDP and Kanyon, got annihilated in that match. Didn't do them any favors, didn't do WCW any favors, didn't do the angle any favors. It was just Undertaker destroying Diamond Dallas Page, which was a recurring theme in their feud. That ended the next night, where Sarah, the Undertaker's now ex-wife, got a pinfall victory over Diamond Dallas Page. Unfreaking believable. They did my boy dirty. I'm a big DDP fan, so wasn't a fan of any of that. But there was one match that was even worse than that, and that was at Unforgiven 2001. What on paper should have worked, where you have, and I've talked about this before on this channel, where I like brawling bruiser tag teams, heavyweight tag teams, two guys that just beat the shit out of people, Road Warriors, Demolition, the APA, the Dudley Boys. Right now in AEW, I think Butcher and Blade are horribly misused because I really, really like them. I loved Power and Glory when I was a kid. The Steiner brothers have that a little bit. Harlem Heat definitely had that. And one of the few tag teams that WCW had towards the end that I really enjoyed was Chronic. And Chronic came in and feuded with Undertaker and Kane. So I'm thinking on paper, it's like, this is my match, man. It's four heavyweights just, having a good old-fashioned slobber knocker, as Jim Ross would say. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. I'm on board with this. And the match itself turned out to be absolutely horrible. I don't know what went wrong. I don't know why it was. Maybe Bryan Adams and Brian Clark had ring rust. I don't know what it was, but the four guys were not in sync, not in tune, and the match itself was so poorly timed and so poorly executed. It ranks pretty high up there as one of Taker's very, very worst matches, and after it was over, we never saw Chronic again. So, again, I don't know exactly what happened to cause this, but this was a match that I, on paper, would have really, really enjoyed, and unfortunately, it didn't work out the way I would have wanted it to, but sometimes those are the breaks. Now we go to 2002, which was low-key one of The Undertaker's most remarkable years. I know, I don't know if a lot of people go back and think of 2002 in general as being a really great year for a lot of people. I think most people remember that year for the brand split starting, Hogan's nostalgia run, and Shawn Michaels coming back and winning the world title. But Undertaker himself actually had quite a few highlights. He took his WrestleMania undefeated streak to 10-0 after a match with Ric Flair that was pretty good. He won the WWE Championship again and went on a fairly successful run, having really good matches like that famous ladder match with Jeff Hardy on Monday Night Raw where they made it look like Jeff was actually going to beat him, and a couple of great matches with Kurt Angle and, various other things like that. And then there were some pretty obvious lowlights, like he had a match with Hogan at Judgment Day 2002 for the title that was not very good. Those two never really had good matches together. I think the Tuesday in Texas match was probably their best, but in general, I don't know, that pairing just never really worked. But Undertaker, if I had to pick a best match for Undertaker, a best program that he had in 2002, it would be his Hell in a Cell match with Brock Lesnar at No Mercy 2002, because to me, more than any other Hell in a Cell match that has ever happened, there are Hell in a Cell matches that are more spectacular, like Undertaker and Shawn at Bad Blood 97, or even Foley and Undertaker, because Foley almost died. There are ones that are probably more creative in a lot of the stuff that they do. But to me, the Undertaker-Lesnar match from 2002 embodies the true spirit of the original intent of Hell in a Cell more than any other. This was probably one of the first Hell in a Cell matches. Well, Taker Bossman didn't leave the cell, but that match stunk so bad that nobody cared. But this was the first major Hell in a Cell match where neither participant left the cage, and they kept all the action inside the cage. And it was an absolute, complete bloodbath. And it was brutal, and by the time it was over, you felt like the two men had just beat the ever-living crap out of each other, which is what Hell in a Cell was supposed to be. You know, I remember somebody saying at the time, because some people, there were some reviews of this match back at the time. Nowadays, it's regarded a lot more favorably, but at the time, the reaction to this match was kind of middle of the road, and they were like, oh, well, they stayed inside the cell the whole time, and nobody tried to kill themselves or anything like that. And a friend of mine made the comment in defense of this match, is like, look, it's called Hell in a Cell, not Hell out of the cell or Hell on the cell. It's called Hell in a Cell. They kept the entire match inside the cell, and they had an absolute barn burner. One of the, in my opinion, one of the best Hell in a Cell matches. I would put it in the top 5. And it was between two guys that could believably beat the crap out of each other if you locked them inside of a Hell in a Cell. These two would have a Hell in a Cell match years later, but I think this one is much better. And I think it, like I said, it truly embodies what the original intent of Hell in a Cell was supposed to be all about. And nowadays, with the current guidelines, you can't have this much blood, or any blood for that matter, in a match. So this match stands out even more in the history of this special match type. And the other big part of this match is that Lesnar defeated The Undertaker on pay-per-view, which was another big win in Lesnar's short career, where he was beating everybody. He beat Flair, he beat Hogan, he beat Rock for the title. He was just running through everybody, and now Undertaker was the latest victim on his list. And Lesnar was truly the next big thing, as Paul Heyman liked to say. So that would be my pick for the best match of Taker's 2002. The worst match of 2002... I know I already talked about the Hogan match at Judgment Day, and that one was bad, but there's one that I would pick that's even worse, and that was his match with Stone Cold Steve Austin at Backlash 2002. Now, Austin and Undertaker had worked with each other many, many times before this. As far as this was their last pay-per-view match together. And generally, when they worked together, it was pretty good. Generally. Now, Austin liked working with Taker. My understanding is because he knew Undertaker would protect him and keep him safe and wouldn't do anything stupid. The unfortunate part is that Austin couldn't take Taker's finishers, given his neck situation. So you would watch an Undertaker-Austin match knowing, you know, in the back of your mind that it's like, okay, he's never taking the tombstone. So it kind of cuts into the drama in that regard, but Austin trusted him for very good reason. And, they got put together a lot because of it. Unfortunately, by this point, the pairing had more than... I mean, that well ran dry a while ago. And it was like, oh, really? They're doing Taker and Austin again? Oh, no. And not only that, but this match is particularly bad because you had Ric Flair as the special guest referee. Now, Ric Flair will go down as one of the greatest workers in the history of the business, one of the greatest world champions in the history of the business. Not denying any of that. He might also be the very worst special guest referee I have ever seen in any match. And I've seen Mongo do it. And I would put Flair as possibly even worse, because I don't know what it was, but he just couldn't time anything right. His count was off constantly throughout the match, and it felt like it threw the match completely out of rhythm. And then they blew the finish, where what the finish was is that Undertaker was going to pin Austin. Austin has his foot on the rope, but Flair misses it and counts the 3 anyway. But if you go back and you look at it, Flair is clearly looking at Austin's leg on the rope, almost to like make sure he gets the spot right. And he's like, oh, okay, now count 1, 2, 3, and it looked really bad, and unfortunately hurt this match. That ultimately led to Undertaker winning the title and having that successful title run that I talked about. But if I had to pick a worst from 2002, though, it would definitely be this one. And it's disappointing because it's The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin. You expect much better out of them, but this one just didn't work. Go to 2003, a year where Undertaker Work rate wise, probably had one of the better years of his career, constantly working with guys like Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle and a higher caliber talent for sure. He also would work with John Cena in one of John Cena's first big pay-per-view matches. So Undertaker, again, further cemented himself into that Legends locker room leader on screen type of role, but this would also be the final year of the American Badass character. So things would be set up at the end of the year where he would transition back into being the dead man persona, but that would return in 2004 for WrestleMania 20, and I'll get there in a little bit. But right now I want to focus on 2003 because picking a worst match was kind of hard because there weren't many bad ones that I could find that would be worthy of calling out as being a really bad match. And ultimately what I went with was his WrestleMania match that year. That was his match with The Big Show and A-Train, and it was a 2-on-1 handicap match that was supposed to be a tag match. It was supposed to be The Undertaker teaming up with Nathan Jones, who on screen had become Undertaker's protege. And I believe the idea was that Nathan would turn on The Undertaker and they would do a program down the road and have a series of matches like that. Not a bad idea, except for the fact that Nathan Jones could not work worth a lick, and they had so little faith in him that they removed him from the tag match the day of the show and just had Undertaker work a handicap match. The match itself is not a fiasco by any means. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, certainly not even Undertaker's worst Mania match. But the problem with it is that when you look at this WrestleMania, you know, Triple H was in a world title match. You got Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. Undertaker and Lesnar were in the main event. Hogan got to have that big match with Vince McMahon, that wild street fight. Rock and Austin got to have their swan song. It felt like so many guys got big matches on the show, and Undertaker just kind of drew the short straw where he's just in this random nothing match that nobody really cares about. And it's like, man, Undertaker really kind of got screwed this year, but again, sometimes that happens at Mania. Again, it's not Taker's worst at WrestleMania, but it's certainly not one of his better ones either. Now, picking a best match was an easy choice for me because there's one match that he had in 2003 that shines above all the others, and I think is a bit of an underrated gem. On an episode of SmackDown in September 2003, The Undertaker challenged Kurt Angle for the WWE Championship, a match that was babyface versus babyface and had been built up for a couple of weeks, with Undertaker having to earn his title shot against Big Show, Brock Lesnar, and various obstacles put in his path by Vince McMahon. And this resulting match was very exciting. I think, you know, probably, I'll go ahead and say it, and this is probably an unpopular opinion given the match they would have in 2006, but I think the best match that Undertaker and Kurt Angle ever had with each other, looking at it purely from a work rate standpoint, the biggest issue with this match is that there's no finish because Lesnar caused a disqualification, setting himself up to take the belt from Angle, and Undertaker was going to go off and splinter off and go work with Vince heading into Survivor Series, and that was kind of the idea. But aside from not having a finish, I thought this match was absolutely superb and one of the most exciting matches in both men's career. And, you know, this is where you know, Kurt by this point had become like that guy that you could have a great match with just about anybody. And Undertaker, I think people realized, you know, he had played that Undertaker persona for so long that a lot of people didn't realize that he could work and he could be a really good athlete and a really good wrestler. And now, by this point, he was allowed to show that more frequently, and he could go out there and have a match like this with Kurt Angle, which was an absolutely superb match all around. One of my personal favorites in both men's career, and one that, again, I feel is a little underrated. So if you haven't seen this match, go check it out. I highly, highly recommend it. It's definitely worth a look. Now, 2004 was a big year for The Undertaker because he would return to the persona that made him famous, the Dead Man, the true classic Undertaker, complete with Paul Bearer at his side. Now, at the end of 2003, he was buried alive by Kane and Vince McMahon, allowing for him to return as this Dead Man persona at, where else? WrestleMania 20, where it all began again. And you know, the return of the Dead Man Undertaker, like, created a lot of intrigue and was very exciting. Even having him go up against Kane for the 9 millionth time, it was still exciting to be like, oh my god, the Undertaker's coming back. Like, the true Undertaker is coming back. And you get to WrestleMania, and the entrance was, once again, awesome. Paul Bearer was rumored, but not confirmed, so when he came out, that was a very nice surprise. And then Undertaker comes out and does the whole, all the pomp and circumstance, the whole entrance. It's great. We all love it. Then he takes the coat off and the hat, and he's basically just the American Badass again. And it was weird. And Bruce Pritchard talked about it a little bit in his podcast, where Undertaker Mark Calloway didn't really want to go back to being the old Undertaker. He wanted to stay the American Badass. And I feel like in that first year, when it returned, like, he was kind of at odds, where he wanted to still be the American Badass, but he was kind of being forced to play the old Undertaker, and the two were kind of meshed together, and it didn't always come off really well, and actually it resulted in some really lousy programs for the Undertaker, I'm sorry to say. He had that bit with Booker T, where Booker T went to a voodoo woman to get a magic bag of dust to fight the Undertaker that ultimately meant nothing, and Booker just got eaten alive by him, so what was the point of the whole thing? And he also had that match with JBL at SummerSlam where the crowd was doing the wave the whole time and nobody cared. Some could say that was because of JBL, and it probably was, to be perfectly honest, because JBL was not exactly the internet mark's favorite, and that was a very internet smarky kind of crowd, if I recall correctly. And then he had to work a lot with Heidenreich, which I'm sure wasn't fun for anybody involved. The dime store Brock Lesnar that was Heidenreich. And it was not a great, grand and glorious return for the Dead Man, because it felt like it was just one bad program after another. And the worst of the bunch, at least to me, and I think it's one of the worst matches, maybe even the worst match of Undertaker's career. And I think it's one of the stupidest gimmick matches in the history of the business, right up there with the worst of TNA or WCW. The Concrete Crypt match at Great American Bash 2004 is one of the stupidest matches I have ever seen, and it floors me that its reputation is not worse than it is, because certain things in wrestling gain reputations for being the worst of all time, like Hogan Warrior at Halloween Havoc 98, things like that. Like, they become, like, it becomes almost like its own folklore, like how bad the thing really was. Chamber of Horrors is another great example of that. But to me, like, the Concrete Crypt match deserves to be in that same class, and for whatever reason, it kind of gets glossed over, and I don't understand why, because it is so stupid, and I hate it. But essentially what the match is that the Undertaker's working a handicap match against the Dudley Boys. While on the stage, Paul Heyman has Paul Bearer in a glass case that's filling up with cement, and every time the Undertaker tries to beat the Dudley Boys, Paul Heyman fills the glass case up even more with cement. And this was a promoted match, so it's like, I'm trying to wrap my head around this crap. So it's like, wait a minute, so the WWE is promoting potential murder now? Like, how exactly does any of this work? And they had done crazy things before, like the Inferno match and the Buried Alive match, but those created exciting matches, even if they were a little bit over the top. This was like, I don't even know, like, how the hell was this thing even supposed to work? And by the way, if you do not like Paul Heyman, do not watch this match, because he is screaming throughout the entire thing. It's probably the most I've ever disliked Paul Heyman as a performer. And I do remember the Dudley Boys doing a shoot interview once where they talked about this match, and apparently when they got backstage, Undertaker turned to them and said something to the effect of, "Boys, I think we were ribbed." So clearly nobody involved liked doing this thing. And if, this whole setup wasn't stupid enough, they get to the finish where Undertaker wins, and then he goes to the stage, takes chases Paul Heyman away or whatever, and then he pulls the lever and just murders Paul Bearer. So it's just like, what the hell was the point of any of this? This whole thing just made no sense. So wait, is Undertaker heel now? I don't understand any of what's going on. Now, really, the reason for this match taking place is that Paul Bearer had health issues and he needed to be written off TV. And I get that, I understand that, and I'm completely sympathetic to those reasonings, but couldn't you have done it better? Like, there had to be a better way. It's like, well, Paul needs to be off TV, so we gotta bury him in concrete. That's the only way we can do it. It's like, Okay, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I could come up with a better idea. Like, how about the heels beat him up and then we don't see him anymore? Like, I really feel like you overthought this a little bit. I don't know, but the whole storyline was stupid. The match was stupid, and I think it's one of the worst of Undertaker's career by a country mile. It's really, really bad. Probably the worst match I've talked about so far in this series. But finding a best match for Undertaker from '04 was kind of hard because, like I said, many of the programs he was involved in were not great, and I had a hard time finding a match that I actually really enjoyed from his. But the best option that I could come up with was the match with JBL at No Mercy 2004, the last ride match, which is essentially just an ambulance match, but with a hearse instead of an ambulance. And it's a casket match on wheels, is the best way to describe it. And the match itself was a good, solid, hardcore match. And I'll be honest, I like JBL as champion. I've said that multiple times on this channel. I enjoyed his reign. And Undertaker was his toughest challenge up to this point, because JBL was this weaselly heel that always wormed away out of any situation he was in. He was a big bully that talked tough, but then you put him in the ring with somebody, halfway competent, and he was going to get his ass kicked. It was just a matter of how he was going to cheat his way out with the title, and that worked. And here in this match, it was like, how the hell is he going to get out of the Undertaker's grasp? Because it just seems like this match is tailor-made for Undertaker, but then, of course, Heidenreich interferes, causes JBL to retain, all that, other gaga. But yeah, of all the matches that Undertaker had in '04, this one was probably the best. It was the most solid. If I had to pick a runner-up, it would probably be the four-way from Armageddon '04, which was JBL defending the title against Booker T, Eddie Guerrero, and The Undertaker, which was another fun, action-packed match where Heidenreich once again cost Undertaker the title. But yeah, those are the only two I could think of. This one was a little bit harder in coming up with a match that I actually enjoyed from Undertaker this year, but he would have much better years moving forward. Now we have 2005, and before I talk about Undertaker's best match of the year, let's get the worst out of the way, because it was at the Royal Rumble of 2005. The first pay-per-view casket match that Undertaker would have following his return as the Dead Man, and this match was kind of like the last bit of the stench of 2004 kind of being washed away, where he finished up his program with Heidenreich, Undertaker defeating Heidenreich once and for all, ending that feud, thank God, and then we can move on to bigger and better things. Now, I remember at the time, there were fears that the planned WrestleMania match was going to be Undertaker and Kane teaming up against Heidenreich and Snitsky. And something that was actually teased on this show, and there were fears that that was going to be the WrestleMania match that would take place. Thankfully, it was not. They found something much better for Undertaker, and that was putting him in the Legend versus Legend Killer feud against Randy Orton. And it was very interesting that they put these two together, because Orton was kind of floundering at this point. He'd had the hot 2004 where he became the man. That feud with Foley was great, became the youngest world champion in company history. And then they turned him they turned him face, and that did not work at all whatsoever. And then he got virtually destroyed by Triple H by the time that whole storyline was done. And it felt like Randy Orton was kind of in a worse place than where he was before. And Undertaker, like I said, in '04, he was over because he was Undertaker, but creatively they hadn't really done anything good with the Dead Man upon its return. So he needed something to kind of keep him going strong. And thankfully, the two right dance partners found each other at exactly the right time heading into WrestleMania. And it was the Undertaker's toughest WrestleMania challenge in a while, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, it bears repeating. This was the last time I truly felt like the streak was in danger. This was Undertaker's 13th WrestleMania match, so it was kind of like unlucky number 13 is going to be the one that beats him. Randy Orton with the RKO and the Legend Killer gimmick, that unfortunately they turned him heel again, thank God. It looked like everything was poised to kind of give Randy Orton that big WrestleMania win, and elevate him to the next level and kind of repair the damage that had been done following the Evolution split and the feud with Triple H. Didn't happen. Undertaker still won, but I was on the edge of my seat that entire match. And again, go back and watch this one. It's one of the most exciting matches I think Undertaker's ever had at WrestleMania. And there was that one spot that I will never shut up about, where Randy Orton countered the choke slam into the RKO. Such a great spot. And I remember watching it, and I leapt out of my chair and yelled, "The streak is over." If you can get me to mark out like that, you get me to like kind of get sucked in like that, that's the magic of professional wrestling. That's the type of thing, that's how I want to react to this stuff on a regular basis. So they got me to do it in that match. It was exciting. It was great. And I think one of my personal favorite Undertaker WrestleMania matches, and I think his personal best from '05. Now, for the rest of the year, Undertaker actually spent most of it working with Randy Orton. Orton took a break after WrestleMania, and Taker did the thing with Muhammad Hassan. Less said about that, the better. But once the summer rolled around, you get into SummerSlam and things like that. Undertaker basically spent the rest of the year working with Randy Orton. They had a great series of matches, culminating with a Hell in a Cell match in the last pay-per-view of the year. But their best match was their first. I love their WrestleMania match. I think it's incredible. I think it's great. And like I said, it's one of Taker's best at the grand stage. Now we move on to 2006, where Undertaker would have one of the more celebrated matches of his career, one that I referenced earlier, and that is his match with Kurt Angle at No Way Out 2006. The match that was deemed, for whatever reason, they just couldn't fit it onto WrestleMania because of other storyline plans that they'd had. So they did it at the February pay-per-view, and Angle and the Undertaker went out there and had a main event for the ages. Excellent match, great stuff all around. Again, I think I prefer the match from '03, except for the finish, but to see the dead man Undertaker working with Kurt Angle and seeing how Kurt Angle works around that version of the character, I think made for a very exciting match, and one of the better matches of 2006 for any wrestling company. I thought it was great. And then Undertaker followed that up with a program with Mark Henry heading into WrestleMania that was like, all right, this feels like kind of a downgrade. And a program with the Great Khali that would dominate most of his year. And yeah, the matches with the Great Khali definitely invoked memories of his matches with Giant Gonzalez, which I didn't hate, as I said before. So Khali's got a better look than Giant Gonzalez, so I thought, okay, maybe they can make this work. Maybe they can do something with this. And then you get to Judgment Day '06. Terrible match. Absolutely terrible match. And the biggest problem with it, it's not that Khali beat Undertaker clean. That I'm okay with. You want to create a monster, and you want him to destroy The Undertaker, because they sold this like... It wasn't just that Khali beat Taker. It was like Khali killed The Undertaker. It was one of those moments where Undertaker got beaten into oblivion and he went away for a while. That's how they were kind of selling it. And Undertaker was left unconscious by the end of the match. Again, I'm okay with that if you want to go that route. The problem is the way they did it was so limp wrist and so terrible that it was downright laughable. I'll never forget it, because now if I'm putting this match together, I'm thinking it's like, all right, I want Khali to just rip the turnbuckle off and just ram Undertaker's face repeatedly into the steel buckle and just leave him a bloodied mess. Like, I want Undertaker to look like he's dead. Like, he's gonna put him through like 9 tables or whatever. Just really sell it that it's like Undertaker has been absolutely destroyed. That's how I would have done this. What they do instead is that Khali, he judo chops Undertaker, like Austin Powers style, and it looks terrible. Judo chop, just chops him, Undertaker goes down, and then I believe he kind of like kicked him, not William Regal style, or punt, or Randy Orton punt kick, or anything like that. It was just, it looked so weak, and then he just pinned him, and it looked terrible, like... It was downright laughable, and the announcers were trying to sell it like, oh my god, Undertaker's been destroyed. And I remember watching this match and just laughing at it and how poorly they executed everything. And I'll say this, I think the Giant Gonzalez match was better, I'm just saying, but that's just me. Yeah, this match was absolutely terrible and probably far beneath what Undertaker should have been doing. But unfortunately, he got stuck working with Kali quite a bit. They were supposed to have the Punjabi prison match together, but there was that weird Great American Bash pay-per-view where like half the roster couldn't make the card. They were scrambling to put something together, so Undertaker just randomly got stuck with Big Show out of nowhere. But yeah, the Punjabi prison, terrible gimmick match. Another like really awful one that, of course, they had to do multiple times. I don't know why, but... yeah, these the matches with Great Khali were not great, and the Judgment Day one in particular was really, really bad. Now we move on to 2007, which saw one of the biggest moments of Undertaker's career, where he defeated Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 23, a match that I felt worked exceedingly well for everyone involved. I said at the time, and I've said since, that this was the biggest match that the SmackDown brand could offer at that point, and putting these two behemoths together, fighting for the richest prize of the SmackDown brand, was only going to create interest and intrigue, and it worked really, really well, creating a fantastic big man match that showed off the strengths of both men, and resulted in a win for The Undertaker, one of the... not the final, but one of the last world titles of his career. And I remember the thought at the time was that, oh, this is Undertaker's one last world title before he retires. Not quite the case, and unfortunately the run was cut short. But before I get into all of that, let me talk about this Batista match, because as I've said, it was a big match to have at WrestleMania. I felt like they stole the show, and it is my pick for Undertaker's best match of 2007 by far. He would have other matches with Batista that were pretty good, but I felt like that one, again, the first one was far and away their best. Now, the rest of his year, again, he would fight Batista a few more times, but he would be embroiled in a storyline with Edge, because Edge would steal the world title from him using the Money in the Bank cash-in. And this angle also involved Mark Henry, who injured The Undertaker and had been feuding with Undertaker going back to the previous year. Man, they kept trying with that Undertaker-Mark Henry feud. It never really worked in a big way, but Undertaker was on the shelf for a few months and then came back at Unforgiven 2007 and had a match with Mark Henry. My pick for Undertaker's worst of 07. Not a terrible match, but it was a foregone conclusion that Undertaker was going to win. I don't think anybody honestly thought that Mark Henry was going to win that match. And it just kind of felt like, okay, here we go again, whoop-de-doo, another return for The Undertaker to slay the monster. I haven't seen this before. But really, the bricks were being laid down for Edge to eventually face Undertaker at WrestleMania for the world title the next year, and that's what they were really setting up for. So this match was just kind of a brick in the layer to get to a much bigger match down the road, but it wasn't that interesting of a brick or a match. In any case, so 2007, not a whole lot to say about this year, honestly. This one was one of the easier picks for me as far as picking a best and a worst match. But Undertaker stayed a big star and was still, up to this point, a fairly regular presence on the show, but things would get even bigger in 2008. Now we move on to 2008, a year that I thought was very successful for Undertaker because he spent most of the year working with Edge, who was a perfect opponent for him and kind of recaptured some of the chemistry that he had had with Shawn Michaels back in '97, where Edge was this perfect Weasley, sniveling, conniving heel that would always get away from Undertaker, and then when they would have the big matches, Undertaker would get his revenge over the rated R superstar. So I thought the chemistry that these two had worked really, really well. The WrestleMania match they had ended up being pretty good, but in a reverse of what I said about his feud with Randy Orton and his feud with Batista, I feel like the WrestleMania match is one of their weaker ones when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. They would have a TLC match later in the year that Edge would win and retire The Undertaker, sending him away, but that didn't last long, and they would have their big burn-off match at SummerSlam of 2008. And this is where the PG era really kicked in, and they started like cursing, blood, sex. They were really starting to trim all of that back down and scale back on a lot of that stuff. The Attitude had run its course, and it was starting to scale back down into what we see today. a far more sanitized product compared to what it had been in years past. And that reflected in the Hell in a Cell match because they weren't allowed to have blood in it. And I'm sure Edge and Undertaker walked into this thing, it's like, how the hell are you supposed to do a Hell in a Cell match without blood? So they were tasked with trying to find a way to make that match work. And what they ultimately did was basically have a TLC match inside the Hell in a Cell. And it worked fantastically. They did leave the cell at one point, not to do something crazy off the top, thank God, but they did have some hijinks outside of the cage. And it was a crazy, fun, and great match to serve as a payoff to their whole storyline and their whole feud, where Edge finally gets his major comeuppance from The Undertaker, resulting in him being put right through the ring and being sent straight to hell. Closing the book on that story, and Undertaker finally getting his revenge on the Rated R Superstar. I thought all of that worked very, very well, and that Hell in a Cell match, considering what they had going against them with the new PG mandates that were going on at the time, they created a match that I thought came off very, very well, and it is my pick for Undertaker's best match of the year. Now, my pick for his worst match of the year goes to his casket match with the Big Show at Survivor Series 2008. By this point, I'd seen Undertaker and Big Show. Not all of their matches are bad. They actually had a pretty good one at, I believe it was No Way Out 2003, and they had that famous one at on Raw in 1999 where Big Show chokeslammed Undertaker through the ring. So they had done some good stuff together previously, but by this point, again, very much like his series of matches with Kane, it was a pairing that I had gotten pretty sick of by this point. So seeing Undertaker and Big Show face each other again on pay-per-view just made me groan, and making it a casket match didn't help. It was just kind of a tired, stale premise, and I guess there was some intrigue. It's like, how are you going to get Big Show inside of a casket? But they'd already kind of played with that with Yokozuna years prior in 1994, so even that wasn't that exciting. And there was no doubt that Undertaker was going to win this thing. So the entire thing was just an exercise in pointlessness and just a boring feud, boring match, and nothing exciting going on here. But hey, if that's the worst you have in a year, you know, you could do much, 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 much worse. It actually wasn't that bad. You know, all things considered, trust me, Undertaker's done much, much worse that I've already covered, and stuff that I'm going to cover coming up. Stay tuned for 2009. This one's about to get spicy. Now let's wrap this up by talking about 2009. And I think picking a best match from 2009 is almost pointless because, let's be honest, we all know what the answer is. It's Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25, a match that many have said is the greatest match in WrestleMania history. I don't know if I'd go that far with it, but it is an excellent match between two of the greatest workers, greatest characters, greatest performers in the history of professional wrestling, and it is worthy of the praise that it has received over the years. So picking a best match in 2009, easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 29. Now, 25, sorry. Now, picking a worst. This one was interesting to me, because this is one that's been really stuck in my crawl at the time it happened. Now, this match happened, keep in mind, this is 2009. I started making videos on this channel in 2010, so this is right before I got onto the scene in YouTube and started spewing my nonsense up on this platform. But you know, this particular match took place, and it angered me so much that I lost a ton of respect for Undertaker. So by the time I came around in 2010, I was like, yeah, fuck Undertaker. Fuck that guy. He's a piece of shit. And that match was his match with CM Punk for the World Heavyweight title at Hell in a Cell 2009. Terrible match that did a ton of damage. At the time, CM Punk was coming out of that red-hot feud with Jeff Hardy and was the world champion and was just top of the mountain, top heel, top everything. He was great. And they even had an angle going where it looked like there was a conspiracy where Vince was keeping CM Punk on top because of his straight edge messaging, which makes so much sense. It's ridiculous. And the story practically writes itself. And everything was going great for CM Punk until he has this Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker. Now, granted, they had had a pay-per-view match the month before where, again, Vince pulled some strings and ensured that CM Punk walked out of that match with the title. They had done the bit where Undertaker's submission hold, the Hell's Gate, was banned. and he was no longer allowed to do it. And this Hell in a Cell match was set up. It was the opening match on the show. I believe, if memory serves me right, this was the first Hell in a Cell pay-per-view where they did 3 Hell in a Cells on one card. Completely unnecessary, destroys the mystique of Hell in a Cell. Thank God they're getting rid of the pay-per-view now, although I would argue at this point the damage has been done. But you get to this match, and Undertaker basically demolishes CM Punk, wins the title, and that's it. And to me, this move was so damaging for many reasons. Creatively, it basically derailed the entire SmackDown brand, which had a bit of a youth movement going on at the time. Because you had CM Punk positioned as the top heel. There was talks that he was going to get a stable, and that would have given spots to certain people. Ultimately, he got the Straight Edge Society, but it was after he lost the title. So by that point, it was like, what's the point now? You had John Morrison, who was moving up the ranks as like a hot young star and looked like a potential challenger for Punk down the road. Dolph Ziggler had been introduced and was finally getting like some kind of traction as a character. Drew McIntyre had been introduced as like a potential big star for the future. And so that was going on at the time. And with them doing this storyline with Punk and Vince trying to pull strings to put Punk on top, it seemed like oh, this is going to be a youth-driven show, and they're kind of changed directions a little bit. And then Undertaker just beat CM Punk, and it was like, well, okay, it's over now. You kind of derailed everything because of what happened. Punk moved down, and then because Punk moved down, Morrison couldn't move up to face him, which keeps Ziggler from winning the IC title, and it just kind of ruined the entire flow and the direction of the entire show and that exciting youth movement that they had going. And damaging decision. I mean, ultimately, Punk would have his day in the sun, and recently in AEW, some would say that Punk was an asshole and probably burned his own bridge and probably caused his own shortcomings in WWE, and Undertaker was teaching him a lesson. That was the rumor at the time. I don't know all the particulars of that or what exactly. The rumor at the time was that Undertaker told Punk he should wear a suit because he's representing the company when he goes off and does interviews and things like that. And Punk replied with something snarky like, "Does Cena do that?" And that didn't sit well with Taker, and then everything played out the way it did. But at this point, it felt like, I don't know exactly what happened. All I know is that as a fan watching the show, it negatively impacted the show in a huge way. And it was so damaging, in fact, that I hate this match. Absolutely, just completely hate this match. It's not the worst worked match of all time. It wasn't like a botch fest or anything like that, but for the amount of damage it did creatively and basically derailed the entire SmackDown brand, it was a match that I wish had never happened. I wish they'd just gone on the path that they were going on with CM Punk on top. Now, some people defended it at the time. All those years ago, people defended it to me at the time, saying that, oh, but now we can get Undertaker versus Jericho. And I'm like, okay, two things. Number one, you don't need the world title to get Undertaker versus Jericho. You can do that anyway. And number two, that match ended up not happening on pay-per-view, so was that worth it? I'm like, is it still worth it? I don't know. But in any case, I hate that match. It's easy pick for Undertaker's worst match of 2009, at least for me. Terrible, terrible stuff all around. And unfortunately, it's also going to be the one that concludes part 2 of this series. Join me later for part 3, where I cover the final decade of Undertaker's run in WWE, where his matches become fewer and fewer and fewer, and the choices, in a weird way, become both easier and harder, depending on certain years. But we'll get there when we get there. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you all later.